Ella had always dreamed of exploring the wild, untouched corners of the world. She wasn't afraid of the unknown, even if it meant facing dangerous terrains and animals in their natural habitat. Growing up in the city, her life had always been surrounded by concrete, cars, and the hum of everyday noise. But there was something about the silence of the wilderness that called to her. Something that felt more alive, more real than anything she had ever known. That's how she ended up in the vast open landscapes of Montana. Ella had come to the mountains for a photography project she'd been working on for months. She wasn't just taking photos. She was capturing moments, wild moments that many people never got to witness. Her camera was her tool, and her passion for wildlife photography was the fuel that pushed her to brave the unknown. She had always been fascinated by wolves, their strength, their independence, and their ability to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Ella's adventure had started off as a dream come true. The air was crisp and fresh, the sky wide and endless. She had been hiking for days, setting up her camera at different spots to catch the perfect shot of the animals she had come to study. The wolves in particular were elusive creatures, and capturing them on film was no easy task. But Ella was determined. Her focus and patience had brought her to this moment. She was on the edge of a small ridge when she finally spotted them. She could see the wolves in the distance, moving silently through the trees, their sleek fur blending into the snow-covered landscape. It was breathtaking. Ella quietly set up her camera, her heart racing with excitement. She was about to capture something incredible, but what she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one watching the wolves. Up the mountain, Caleb, a local cowboy, was doing what he did best, keeping an eye on his cattle. Caleb was a man of few words. His life was simple, built around the ranch and the land. He knew the mountains like the back of his hand. He'd grown up here, raised by his grandfather, learning how to ride, herd cattle, and respect the wilderness. He spent most of his time alone, working on the ranch and checking on his animals. On this particular day, Caleb was doing his usual rounds. His horse moved smoothly through the snow, his eyes scanning the land for any signs of trouble. Caleb had learned early in life that the mountains were unpredictable. What seemed peaceful one moment could turn dangerous the next. But he had no idea that today, he'd come across someone who would change his life forever. As Caleb rode higher up the mountain, his horse's hooves making soft thuds in the snow, he spotted something unusual in the distance. A figure, a woman, was crouched near a ridge, her camera aimed at something below. Caleb squinted, trying to make out what she was doing. She was alone, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to her, but something inside told him to keep watching. A strange feeling crept into his gut, as if he could sense something was wrong. He urged his horse forward, his instincts telling him to be cautious. He'd been around long enough to know that the wilderness could be cruel, even deadly if you weren't careful. Ella, focused entirely on the wolves, didn't hear Caleb's horse approaching. She was so engrossed in the moment that she barely noticed the chill in the air growing sharper, or the sound of movement from behind. The wolves, who had been near the edge of the forest, were now moving closer. At first, Ella thought nothing of it. They were curious creatures, but she knew that wolves typically kept their distance from humans. But today was different. As she adjusted her lens to get a better shot, she felt a strange shiver run down her spine. The wolves, their golden eyes glowing against the white snow, were no longer just watching from the trees. They were closer now, much closer. Ella's heart skipped a beat as she looked around, realizing the landscape had gone eerily quiet. The wind had stopped. The birds had stopped chirping. Everything felt too still. Before she could react, she heard the unmistakable sound of paws crunching through the snow, and she whipped around to see a pair of wolves darting from the trees. Then another, and another. They were circling her. Panic surged through Ella. She had heard stories of wolves attacking, but she had never truly believed them. Wolves weren't supposed to attack humans, right? But the wolves weren't just watching her anymore. They were closing in, drawn to her scent. Her heartbeat quickened as she backed away slowly, but with each step she took, the wolves came closer. Her mind raced. What should she do? She had no weapon, no way to defend herself, just her camera and the tiny knife she kept in her bag. She wasn't sure how many wolves there were, but their eyes gleamed in the fading light, and they were closing in with terrifying precision. Ella felt her legs tremble, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She had always prided herself on her bravery, but in that moment she was terrified. The thought of being surrounded by those wild creatures, their sharp teeth glinting in the light, made her blood run cold. Her body froze, her mind racing when suddenly, from out of nowhere, she heard the sound of galloping hooves. Before she could even process what was happening, a figure appeared in front of her. Caleb. He rode in like a storm, his horse moving fast, his eyes locked on the wolves that were circling Ella. With expert precision, Caleb urged his horse closer to the pack. He shouted at the wolves, a loud, commanding voice that echoed across the mountainside. The wolves hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Caleb didn't wait for them to make up their minds. He kicked his horse into a gallop, his lasso flying through the air. The wolves scattered, retreating into the trees as Caleb rode past Ella, his eyes scanning the area to make sure the danger had passed. Ella stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Her legs felt like jelly, and it took everything she had just to stay upright. Caleb dismounted from his horse, his boots crunching in the snow as he walked toward her. He didn't say anything at first. He just gave her a steady look as if making sure she was okay. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked, his voice calm but firm. Ella nodded, though she was too shaken to speak. Her hands were trembling and she couldn't seem to catch her breath. "Wolves don't usually come this close to humans," Caleb said, his voice low and measured. "But they're hungry this time of year. It's best to stay on the move when you're in their territory." Ella looked at him, still processing what had just happened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. "No need to thank me. Just make sure you're more careful next time." He glanced at the mountains, the vast wilderness stretching out around them, and then back at Ella. "What's a woman like you doing out here alone anyway?" Ella hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain. She had always been independent, always prided herself on her ability to take care of herself. But something about the way Caleb looked at her, half amused, half concerned, made her feel small, like she had just made a mistake she couldn't take back. "I'm a photographer," she said finally. "I've been capturing wildlife for years now, but I guess I underestimated how dangerous it can get out here." Caleb didn't say anything at first. He simply regarded her for a moment, as if considering her words. "You're lucky I came along when I did. Next time, make sure you've got someone with you." Ella nodded, still shaken but grateful. She had survived the wolves, but there was something else in Caleb's steady gaze that made her realize that her adventure in the wilderness had only just begun. As Caleb rode away, the sound of the wolves fading behind them, Ella stood frozen for a few more moments, trying to steady her racing heartbeat. Her legs felt like jelly, and the adrenaline that had surged through her now left her feeling weak and unsteady. She had barely managed to keep herself calm during the encounter, but now, in the quiet aftermath, the reality of what had just happened hit her all at once. She was alive, but she couldn't shake the image of the wolves circling her, their eyes gleaming in the fading light. Ella had been so sure of her skills in the wilderness, confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. But this was something different. Caleb had saved her. Without him, she wasn't sure what would have happened. The thought of the wolves closing in on her again made her stomach churn. She turned to look at him, still on his horse, glancing back at her with an unreadable expression. "Are you okay?" he asked again, his voice quiet but firm. There was something in his tone that made her feel like she needed to prove that she was fine, but in truth she didn't feel fine at all. Ella nodded, though it wasn't convincing. "Yeah, I think I'm okay," she replied, her voice shaky. She hadn't really gotten a good look at him yet, still caught in the rush of the moment. Now that the danger had passed, she could see Caleb more clearly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a faded shirt, with a cowboy hat tilted slightly to one side. His face was rugged, with a few days' worth of scruff, and his eyes, dark, steady, seemed to be always on the lookout for something, as if he never really relaxed, even when the danger had passed. His calm demeanor was a sharp contrast to the chaos Ella had just experienced. He dismounted his horse with ease, his boots crunching in the snow as he approached her. For a moment, Ella felt awkward, unsure of what to say. How could she thank him properly? Words seemed so small after what he had just done. "Thanks," Ella finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what would have happened without you." Caleb gave a small nod, as if he wasn't used to being thanked, or maybe he just didn't think it was necessary. His eyes glanced over to the direction the wolves had fled, still watching the trees, as if making sure they weren't coming back. "You're welcome," he said simply, "but you should have known better than to be out here alone. It's dangerous, especially this time of year." Ella felt a sting of embarrassment. She wasn't used to being told what she should or shouldn't do, but she knew Caleb was right. She had underestimated the wilderness, thinking it was all beauty and freedom without considering the dangers that came with it. "I'm a photographer," she said, trying to explain herself. "I've spent years working with wildlife, but I guess I didn't expect anything like this." Caleb gave her a sidelong glance, his expression unreadable. "Wildlife's a lot more unpredictable than you think. Wolves don't usually attack humans, but when they're hungry, or when they feel threatened, they can do things you wouldn't expect." Ella nodded, taking in his words. He wasn't trying to scare her. He was just being realistic. She wasn't used to people speaking to her this way, in such a straightforward, no-nonsense manner. Caleb's calmness made her feel a little better, but it also made her realize how much she still had to learn. She looked down at the snow beneath her feet, feeling a little lost in the vastness of the wilderness. How had she ended up in such a dangerous situation? She'd been so focused on her project, on the idea of capturing the perfect shot, that she had forgotten one of the most important lessons of being out here, respecting the wild and all the creatures that lived in it. Caleb broke her thoughts. "I'm heading back to the ranch now. You might want to come with me, get out of these mountains for the night. It's getting dark, and it's not safe to be out here alone after sunset." Ella hesitated. She wasn't someone who liked to rely on others, especially not strangers. But there was something about Caleb's offer that felt genuine, like he was trying to help, not control her. She had no idea where she would go, and the thought of spending the night alone, still shaken from the close encounter, didn't appeal to her. "Okay," she said, nodding slowly. "I guess that would be a good idea." Without another word, Caleb turned toward his horse and Ella followed. The ride down the mountain was slow and steady, the light beginning to fade as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The air was crisp and the snow crunched beneath the horse's hooves. Ella didn't speak much, still processing everything that had happened. Caleb was quiet too, focused on the trail ahead, but she could feel his presence beside her, steady and unshaken. As they descended further, the landscape began to change. The wild mountains slowly gave way to rolling hills, the trees thinning out. Caleb's ranch was close, and Ella could tell from the way he guided his horse through the snow that he knew this land like the back of his hand. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun had almost fully set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the sky. Caleb helped Ella off her horse, guiding her toward the small log cabin near the barn. The warmth inside was a welcome contrast to the cold, and Ella sighed as the heat from the fire in the stove filled the room. "Make yourself at home," Caleb said, motioning to a worn couch by the fireplace. He went to a small kitchen area and started preparing something to eat, his movements quiet and efficient. Ella sat down on the couch, still trying to shake off the lingering effects of the afternoon. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in her head, the wolves, the fear, and Caleb's sudden appearance charging in like a knight on horseback. She had never experienced anything like that before. "You don't talk much, do you?" Ella asked after a few moments of silence, breaking the quiet between them. It felt strange to speak, but the silence was starting to weigh on her. Caleb looked over his shoulder at her, his lips twitching into the slightest hint of a smile. "Not really," he said. "I'm more of a doer than a talker." Ella smiled, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him, despite how different they were. He was so calm, so sure of himself, while she felt like she was still trying to catch her breath after everything that had happened. "I guess I've got a lot to learn about the wilderness," she said, looking down at her hands. "And about myself." Caleb didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a bowl of stew on the table in front of her. "It's not about learning everything at once," he said. "It's about taking your time, respecting the land, and knowing when to ask for help." Ella looked up at him, her thoughts shifting. She had never expected to find someone like Caleb in the middle of nowhere, especially not someone so calm and sure in the face of danger. He had saved her life today, but something about him made her feel like she was starting a new chapter. Not just in her adventure, but in her life. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. Caleb met her eyes for a brief moment before nodding. "You're welcome." and for the first time since the wolves had surrounded her, Ella felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The days following the close call with the wolves were a blur for Ella. She had expected to feel relief, but instead, she felt like something in her life had shifted. The mountains, once just a backdrop to her photography project, now felt like a world full of hidden dangers. The rush of adrenaline had faded, but her thoughts often drifted back to Caleb, the calm cowboy who had saved her life. Ella spent the next few days at Caleb's ranch recuperating from the scare. He had insisted she stay until she was fully recovered, though Ella was reluctant at first. She didn't like depending on others, and she had always prided herself on her independence. But there was something about the way Caleb looked after her, without hesitation or expectation, that made it hard for her to leave. His quiet, steady presence had a way of calming her, making her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Every morning, Caleb would prepare breakfast, a simple but hearty meal of eggs and toast, and they would sit together at the small kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Ella didn't know much about Caleb's life, but he didn't seem interested in sharing the details. He wasn't the type to speak of his past, but that was okay. Ella, too, found herself holding back pieces of herself. The more time they spent together, the more she realized how much she kept to herself, how much she'd hidden from the world. One morning, as the sun started to rise, Caleb took her out on a ride across the ranch. The crisp morning air bit at their skin, but it felt refreshing, a welcome change from the dry warmth of the cabin. Caleb led the way on his horse, with Ella following closely behind, her mind wandering as she watched the rolling hills stretch out before them. The ranch seemed endless, with open fields on one side and the jagged mountains in the distance. The two of them rode for hours, Caleb guiding her through the paths he knew so well. At first, Ella had been nervous on horseback, but with Caleb's patient instruction, she began to feel more confident. It was strange to her how quickly she had adapted to being in the wilderness, to the sense of freedom the open land provided. But it wasn't just the land that was different, it was Caleb. She couldn't explain it, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her feel as if she belonged here, too. Ella often asked him about the ranch, about the cattle and the land, and Caleb would answer, his voice low and measured, but always with a certain fondness for the life he had built here. He spoke about his grandfather, the man who had taught him how to work the land, how to respect the animals and the mountains that surrounded them. Ella could tell that Caleb had a deep connection to this place, one that ran deeper than just the work. It was in the way he cared for the animals, the way he moved through the land with such familiarity, as if it was part of him. Over the days, their conversations became easier, more comfortable. Caleb would show her the various parts of the ranch, the barns, the stables, the pastures where the cattle grazed. He even took her to a small creek that ran through the land, a quiet, peaceful spot he liked to visit when he needed a moment of solitude. It was there, sitting on the banks of the creek, that Caleb finally opened up a little more about his life. "I never planned to stay on the ranch," Caleb admitted, his voice thoughtful as he skipped a stone across the water. "I used to dream of leaving, going out and seeing the world. But when my grandfather got sick, I came back to help. He'd always wanted me to take over the ranch, and I guess I never really thought about it until it was too late. Now this is where I belong. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it's what I know." Ella listened carefully, sensing the weight of his words. She had always assumed Caleb was just the typical cowboy, rugged, strong, quiet. But hearing him talk about his grandfather, about the ranch, she realized there was more to him than she had imagined. Caleb wasn't just a man of the land. He was someone who had made sacrifices, someone who carried the legacy of those who came before him. She felt a pang of something deep inside her, something she couldn't quite identify. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced before, an unexpected pull toward Caleb, toward his life, toward the quiet strength he seemed to carry with him wherever he went. As the days passed, Ella found herself looking forward to the moments she spent with Caleb, the mornings spent riding together, the evenings spent by the fire, the quiet conversations they shared. She didn't know when it happened, but she had started to rely on his presence, started to appreciate the simple comfort he provided just by being there. But as much as she enjoyed being with him, Ella also felt conflicted. She had come to the mountains with one goal in mind: to finish her photography project, to capture the wild, untamed beauty of the land. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to handle things on her own. But Caleb was different. He made her feel things she wasn't sure she was ready to feel, things she hadn't planned on. One afternoon, as they sat together in the cabin, Caleb noticed her looking out the window, her gaze distant. He had learned to read her quiet moods by now, and he knew something was on her mind. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. Ella hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I came here to finish my project. I didn't expect all of this." She motioned around the cabin as if it were the cause of her confusion. "It's just, I'm not sure what to do next." Caleb didn't say anything at first, letting the silence hang between them. He understood. He had seen it before. People who came to the mountains looking for something but never knowing exactly what they were searching for. He had seen others leave, searching for a life outside of the land, and yet there was something about Ella that felt different. "I know you came here for a reason," he said finally, his voice steady. "And I know you're not the type to stay in one place for too long. But if you're asking me what to do next, I'd say follow your instincts. If you feel like you need to go, then go. But if you're not sure, you don't have to make any decisions right now. You've got time." Ella looked at him, his calm, steady eyes meeting hers. For a moment she felt lost in the depth of his gaze, as if he understood her more than she understood herself. She wanted to stay, wanted to explore whatever was between them, but she also knew she couldn't ignore the pull of her own journey, the project she had come to complete. "I don't know what I want," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to know right now," Caleb said gently. "Just take things one step at a time." His words echoed in her mind as she looked out the window once more, the mountains stretching out before her, vast and endless. There was so much more to discover, both in the world around her and in herself, and for the first time she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay not to have all the answers. The days had turned into weeks, and Ella had become a regular part of Caleb's world. Each morning they would meet by the barn, ready to begin their work for the day. Caleb had taught her more about the ranch than she ever thought she'd learn. She had become familiar with the chores, feeding the cattle, mucking out the stalls, even helping to mend fences. And though she'd never imagined herself as someone who could handle a life like this, Ella found satisfaction in the work. But despite the steady rhythm of the ranch and the peaceful routine that had begun to settle around her, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of Ella's mind. She had come to the mountains to finish her project, and each day she spent with Caleb, she was reminded of that purpose. Her camera still sat on the table untouched, as she found herself drawn deeper into the life Caleb had built on the ranch. One evening, as the sun began to set, Caleb was out in the fields with the cattle, making sure everything was in order before the weather turned. Ella had always admired how calm and collected he was in everything he did, no matter how demanding the task. He had a quiet strength about him, something that made him stand out among other men she'd met in her life. She couldn't deny that she was beginning to feel more for him than she had ever expected. But as much as Ella enjoyed their time together, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a world that wasn't hers. The ranch, the mountains, they all felt so distant from the life she had back home. She was torn between the woman she was becoming here and the photographer she had always been. Caleb was everything she had never expected, but she wasn't sure if she could stay forever. On the morning that everything changed, the weather had taken a turn. The sky had darkened overnight, and a thick fog rolled in from the mountains, blanketing the ranch in an eerie silence. Caleb had warned her the weather could change quickly in the mountains, but Ella hadn't expected it to be this sudden. "Stay close to the cabin today," Caleb had said earlier, looking out over the land, his brow furrowed. "The fog's thick and it's easy to get lost out here." Ella had nodded, agreeing to take it easy for the day. But as the fog thickened, she found herself growing restless. She had planned to spend the morning working on her photography, but with the weather as bad as it was, it seemed impossible to get any shots. That's when she heard it, shouting. Ella rushed to the window, her heart racing. She could just make out Caleb's figure in the distance on horseback, shouting something she couldn't hear over the wind. She knew something was wrong. The fog made everything blurry, but she could tell that Caleb wasn't alone. There were other figures, dark shapes emerging from the mist. She grabbed her coat and rushed outside, not bothering to think about the danger. She had to help him, whatever was happening. As she got closer, the fog began to clear just enough for her to make out the situation. Caleb was facing down two men on horseback, men she didn't recognize. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold, and they looked out of place on the ranch. "Caleb," Ella called out, her voice cracking in the thick air. "What's going on?" Caleb didn't take his eyes off the men as he motioned for Ella to stay back. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that Ella hadn't heard before. "Stay inside, Ella, it's not safe," but she didn't listen. She couldn't. She had seen Caleb take care of himself in the wilderness, but these men were different. They were a threat, and something told her that they weren't just passing through. Ella stepped closer, but Caleb saw her approach and raised a hand to stop her. "I said stay inside." Ella hesitated, unsure of what to do. She was still a little distance away, but she could feel the tension in the air. The two men on horseback were now circling Caleb, their voices rising in anger. From what she could hear, they were arguing about something to do with the land. "You should have sold it when we offered," one of the men said, his voice rough. "Now you're making things difficult, Caleb. You don't own this land." "You never did," Ella's heart pounded. She could see Caleb's jaw tighten, his grip on the reins of his horse steady. He wasn't backing down. She knew Caleb well enough by now to understand that he wouldn't be intimidated easily, but these men didn't seem like people who would walk away without a fight. "Leave my land," Caleb said firmly, his voice calm, but with an edge. "This ranch is mine and I'm not selling." Ella could see the men exchange glances. And then one of them, larger, meaner looking, reined in his horse and advanced toward Caleb. He was clearly trying to provoke him, to force him into a confrontation. "That's where you're wrong," the man sneered. "This land belongs to my family now. You've had your time, Caleb, now it's ours." Ella's stomach turned. She knew Caleb had a history with the land, but she had no idea it went this deep. These men weren't just visitors, they were looking to take something that wasn't theirs. She could feel the tension building, and she was sure that a fight was about to break out. Before she could think any further, Caleb's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I said, get off my land." The larger man gave a mocking laugh, but before he could respond, Caleb urged his horse forward, closing the gap between them. The other man's horse shuffled nervously, but the two of them held their ground. Ella could tell that Caleb was trying to defuse the situation, but it was clear that these men weren't going to leave peacefully. Without thinking, Ella rushed forward, calling out, "Stop!" Her voice broke through the tense air, and both men turned to look at her. Caleb's eyes widened, his expression shifting from one of calm authority to one of frustration. "Ella, get back inside now," he said, his voice low, but the command was clear. Ella didn't move. Instead, she faced the two men. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't stand by and watch this happen. The men looked at her with disdain, but Ella stood her ground, her heart racing in her chest. "This is Caleb's land. You don't get to take it from him," she said, her voice louder now, more confident than she'd felt in a long time. The larger man sneered at her, but before he could say anything else, the other man pulled back on the reins of his horse. "We'll be back," he muttered, his eyes burning with anger. Without another word, they turned their horses and rode off into the fog, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Caleb remained where he was, watching them go. When he finally turned to face Ella, his expression was hard, but there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "I told you to stay inside." Ella stood tall, her hands trembling slightly as she crossed her arms. "I wasn't going to let them threaten you." Caleb studied her for a moment, then sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I appreciate you stepping in, but this isn't your fight, Ella." "I'm not going to stand by while they try to take what's yours," she said firmly, stepping closer. "You've helped me so much, Caleb, it's the least I can do." For a long moment, Caleb didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his gaze softening. Ella could see that the weight of the situation had begun to sink in. He didn't want to involve her, but she could see how much he appreciated her support. Finally, Caleb nodded. "Thank you, Ella, but you need to know something. I won't back down from these people. I won't let them take this ranch, no matter what." Ella looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but in that moment she realized that she was more than just a visitor here. This wasn't just Caleb's fight anymore, it was theirs. The morning after the confrontation with the two men, the ranch was quiet. The fog had lifted, but the air still felt heavy, as though the threat from the previous day had lingered in the atmosphere. Caleb had gone out to check the land as he always did, making sure everything was in order. Ella, on the other hand, had stayed inside, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. She couldn't help but replay the scene in her head. The way the men had come onto Caleb's land so confidently, the way Caleb had stood his ground without hesitation. She had stepped in without thinking, not caring about the consequences. But now, in the stillness of the morning, she realized just how much she had risked. She had never been one to shy away from danger, but she had never truly been this close to something that mattered so much to someone else. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land to Caleb. It was everything, his home, his history, and his future. And Ella had been ready to protect it, to protect him without a second thought. But the question she couldn't answer was, what did that mean for her? For the first time since she had arrived, Ella found herself unsure of what to do next. She had come to the mountains with a clear purpose to finish her photography project, but now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't so sure. The connection she had with Caleb was undeniable, but she didn't know how long it would last or what role it played in her life. She couldn't just abandon her dreams, could she? The thought of leaving now felt like she was running away from something she wasn't ready to face. As she walked around the cabin, trying to push her thoughts aside, Caleb returned. His face was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes when he saw her. He had always been calm and collected, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel like he could see through all her confusion, all her doubts. "Everything's all right," Caleb said, his voice steady. "The land's fine. The men who showed up yesterday won't be coming back. They don't have the guts to challenge me anymore." Ella nodded, but she could see that Caleb was holding something back. He had always been the kind of person who kept his emotions in check, who didn't reveal too much. But now she could tell there was something he wanted to say, something he was trying to avoid. "Caleb, what's really going on?" Ella asked, her voice gentle. "Those men weren't just passing through. They wanted something." Caleb met her eyes, and for a moment there was silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, Caleb spoke, his words slow and careful. "My family lost the ranch a long time ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandfather had a partner who betrayed him, sold the land off to a big corporation. We fought to get it back, but we couldn't. I was a kid when it all happened, and I've spent my whole life trying to get it back. This land, it's more than just a place to me. It's part of who I am. It's my family's legacy." Ella listened carefully, her heart aching as she heard the weight of his words. She had known that Caleb's connection to the ranch ran deep, but hearing the pain in his voice made her realize just how much this place meant to him. "I understand," Ella said softly, stepping closer to him. "This land is everything to you." Caleb nodded, but there was something in his eyes, something that Ella couldn't quite place. It was a mix of determination and fear. A fear that maybe after all this time he still wasn't sure if he could protect it, if he could protect the one thing that had always been his. "I've spent so long fighting for it," Caleb continued, his voice shaking ever so slightly. "I never thought about what it would mean if I didn't have it anymore. I never thought about what would happen if I lost everything." He paused, looking away for a moment before turning back to her. "But what I didn't realize until now is that I was fighting alone. I've been so focused on this land, on holding on to it, that I never let anyone close enough to help me. I never thought about what I was losing in the process." Ella stood there, the weight of his words settling on her heart. She had come to the mountains thinking she was just passing through, doing her job. But now, after everything that had happened, the wolves, the men who had threatened them, and the quiet moments they had shared, Ella knew that this wasn't just a passing phase. She had become a part of Caleb's life, and he had become a part of hers. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady, "you're not alone. I'm here. I've always been here, even when you didn't realize it." Caleb looked at her, his eyes softening. "Ella, you don't have to stay. I know this place isn't your home. You came here for your project, and I know how much that means to you. You can leave whenever you're ready." Ella shook her head. "It's not just about the project anymore, Caleb. It's about you. And it's about what we've built here. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to leave. Not now." The air between them seemed to shift, the tension that had been building ever since they first met finally breaking. Ella had come to the mountains to take photos, to document the beauty of nature. But what she had found here was so much more than that. She had found someone who made her feel like she belonged, someone who saw her for who she really was, even when she wasn't sure herself. Caleb stepped forward, his hand brushing against hers. You're not just someone who takes photos, Ella. You're someone who sees the world for what it is. You see the beauty in the simplest things, and that's something I've never been able to do. You've changed the way I see this place. You've changed the way I see myself. Ella smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected to find someone like Caleb, someone who made her feel both grounded and free. You've changed me too, she whispered. For the first time in a long time, Caleb allowed himself to smile. It was a small smile, but it was real. He didn't need to say anything more. They both understood. Later that day, after the storm had passed and the sky had cleared, Caleb and Ella went for a walk outside, hand in hand. The ranch stretched out before them, the golden fields of grass swaying in the breeze, the mountains standing tall in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time Ella didn't feel like she was just passing through. She felt like she was home. Together they stood at the edge of the land, the vast beauty of the ranch before them. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And in that moment, Ella knew that this was where she belonged. Not because she had come to find something, but because she had found it in the most unexpected of places. And as Caleb squeezed her hand, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. They were no longer two strangers from different worlds. They were partners ready to build a future side by side.